Welcome to Humble Brag. I'm Nate Mendel, and in this episode, we are going to cover the intricacies of free will. But before we dive in, allow me to give a brief overview of what the dilemma is with regards to free will. Put on your philosopher hat, buckle up, and let's take a ride. For those who are familiar, free will is one of the great paradoxes. But why? What is so complicated about it? We either do or we don't have free will. And if we do, then it should be obvious. Or if we don't, then it should be obvious. Why the complexity? Indeed, the topic does seem pretty complex. More complex than it needs to be, if you ask me. Here's the dilemma in a nutshell. It is a question of whether we have true control over our actions, or if our actions are determined by factors outside of our control. For example, our environment, genetics, or divine intervention. Determinism is the philosophy that we don't have free will. Everything's determined by various factors. But if we genuinely do have free will, as is taught in Jewish thought and many other religions, then it raises questions regarding those factors, right? What role does environment, genetics, and the divine play in the grand scheme of things? The dilemma highlights a tension between personal autonomy and the forces that seem to shape us, questioning the nature of responsibility and moral accountability. In this episode, we are going to unravel that with one goal: to leave with a conclusion. So you could rest tonight knowing that free will is no longer the big enemy. You could take the boxing gloves off. You no longer have to wrestle and fight and quarrel with free will. I believe that all paradoxes, all philosophical and spiritual complexities are simple by nature. And the reason I believe that is because God is simple, God is truth, then truth is simple. And the only reason it appears to be complex is because we don't understand it. I believe all paradoxes are just as such. Matter of fact, Rabbi Nachman of Breslov tried to give us a glimpse of this when he said something along the lines of, free will is simple. You do it if you want to, or you don't if you don't. Now, that might seem like an oversimplification, and the philosopher within us won't accept it. In fact, many thousands of philosophers over millennia, thousands of years, have pondered this question, and it is still not laid to rest. Here I am recording an entire episode on it. But Rabbi Nachman was giving us a little glimpse, a little glitter. I think he understood the simplicity of things. And perhaps nobody was able to put the right words to it, but I imagine many have understood it spiritually or intuitively. There are paradoxes that we cannot understand while living in this world. I don't know if free will is one of them. Perhaps it is. I've heard it said that it is. I just don't know if it is. More complicated ones, such as how does God exist, those are questions that we will never be able to answer. Matter of fact, although it seems like a logical question, I don't think it is, and I'm going to discuss that in another episode. But free will specifically likes to play games with the mind because it seems so tangible, like it's right there. But when you break it down to its fundamentals, it eludes you. The more scientific and physical we get about things, but if we don't have free will, then accountability goes out the window. Law and order, proper justice, fair justice, gone. We learn that notwithstanding, Judaism teaches us that we have free will. Otherwise, how can we be punished for anything? So free will is an integral part of all monotheistic religions. The question is, how does it make sense? What free will do we or don't we have? Going back to why I think it's simple by nature, I will give you an example. Everything that seems complicated on the outset becomes simple once the knowledge is understood. For example, when we began building computers, and the computers that we built were huge, they were the size of a building. To conceptualize then, at that period, somehow reduced this machine into something this small, literally the size of a marble, because we now have computers and computer chips that are minuscule, it appeared complex, complicated, perhaps undoable. But as our knowledge improved, trial and error, building upon what we had, researching and iterating a million times over the course of that evolution, it became simple that it is possible. And now, if you have a child who's born into this technologically advanced society, it's not complicated to them. Even if they learn how it works, it isn't complicated. It isn't hard. I think most paradoxes are similar. I'll give you one more example. There are hunter-gatherer tribes that still live in the Amazon and various parts of the world today, have not adopted civilized faculties. They don't use mathematics. They obviously don't use science. They don't even do agriculture. They literally hunt for their food. And in living this way, decade after decade, they maintained an ancient culture. It could perhaps give us some insight into what it was like when we were simpler humans. Now, you can watch this video on YouTube. These videos exist out there. When you go visit these people and you ask them about, for example, their ability to count numbers, large numbers, or do mathematics, it's non-existent. They simply don't do it, have no need for it, have no interest in it, and they don't understand it. One of the ones that I watched, I believe, only counted up until like 10, maybe because, they have 10 fingers or some practical number, but nothing beyond that. And I wondered to myself, why is it that they would struggle, for example, if you ask them what 10 times 10 was or 5 times 5 was? They simply do not process these numbers. 100, there's no reason for them to ever process 100. And by doing some research into that and opening up my mind to understanding how the simpler mind works, I've come to learn and I've come to find that because they have no use and need for it, they don't do it. In other words, their brain simply is not trained to do it. Therefore, it has a hard time doing it. It doesn't mean they can't learn how to think in such terms. They just simply don't, and therefore they don't have it. So if you go up to them and you say, what's 5 times 5? You lost them. If they have to try to figure out 5 times 5, let alone that their vocabulary probably doesn't even have such expression to begin with. But let's just say somehow you translate that you're trying to do an equation with them. They would really, really struggle mentally. It would be a true difficult task for them. The same way, if you ask me to do a complex mathematical equation. Sometimes I watch Veritasium on YouTube, and he's doing these mathematical stuff. And I think he's an electrical engineer or something. Whatever it is, he's obviously really well educated, and math is not my thing. I could do simple math, but you come with these equations, I'm lost. And it helps me understand, well, they're the same lost on the simple equation. 5 times 5 loses them, and me doing the pies and the formulas and the divisions, and I'm just gone. Like, my brain completely checks out from it. Why? I have no use for it. It doesn't improve my life. Nothing I do revolves around numbers in that capacity, on that level. We have calculators, we have phones. I could ask ChatGPT, I could ask Google. It's the same thing. It is that particular phenomenon that I believe is present when it comes to complex philosophical ideas and paradoxes. We were not trained to think the way that we need to think in order to understand philosophical paradoxes. Therefore, when we go into the intricacies of any of them, in this particular case, it would be free will, our brain goes into overdrive. I have spent perhaps dozens, maybe hundreds of hours meditating and thinking about free will. I no longer think it's complicated. I think it's very simple. But you realize the irony in that. It's simple because I spent so many hours thinking about it. Another thing I experienced when I sit and think about it, and I get into the intricacies of it, is that my brain is in overdrive. Why is that? Well, for the same reason that I just explained with the mathematics, I'm not trained to think this way. So by forcing my brain to go down a path, it's like pushing a train onto a different track that it doesn't belong on. Our brain and intellect, evolved as it is, was not conditioned to think in such terms. Nor do I believe it was conditioned to solve these types of complexities. Nonetheless, the human race is obsessed with figuring it out. Everyone is seeking God. Everyone is seeking truth. Truth is God. God is truth. Despite the label you apply to it, science is obsessed with trying to figure it out. Every religion is obsessed with getting close and figuring out the secrets, the truth. The more our brains evolve and the more our intellect evolves, the closer we become to potentially solving some of these complexities. And when we solve these complexities, they are no longer complicated. It's like bingo, invention. This is all a big introduction, but this introduction is very important because this can help you on your philosophical journey in general. To understand deep philosophical ideas doesn't require a hammer or a grinder. It requires water, fluidity. It requires letting go and meditation because you need to stop, do deep introspection, understand your mental and intellectual prowess and faculties, how they operate, what their default setting is, and say, I need to get onto a different track to understand. When you do this, you are very likely to go through stages of revelation. I believe many in the past, many philosophers, and have gone through these stages of revelation. But I believe one thing that they were lacking, and that we're still lacking up until today, is the articulation. I believe many rabbis, sages, philosophers, and geniuses understood things that they did not know how to articulate and put into words or how to give over. Anyone who ponders the depth, anyone who meditates, anyone who's deeply spiritual will have deep philosophical and spiritual insights and thoughts and revelations. 99.9% of the time, they cannot get it out. It's like a dream that you forget when you wake up. You have this dream vivid. You see it clearly. You wake up. An hour later, it seems to be gone. People who ponder the depths have this all the time because when you think about deep philosophical issues and you learn how to process those problems and how to problem solve them, it starts becoming simpler and easier. And your intuition often touches little tiny bits. But when you try to get it out, it's just beyond grasp, and then you forget certain details of it, and then it comes out, perhaps it's incoherent, doesn't kind of make sense, doesn't seem to have solved what you thought it solved, so on and so forth. So learning to take a deep breath and reevaluating how we come at it, as I described in a previous episode, the path to information is just as important as the information we seek in and of itself. If we take the wrong path to information, we will simply not reach our destination. It's quite that simple. And I believe for thousands of years we've not been reaching our destination when it comes to philosophical paradoxes. But it's not all doom and gloom. I believe that we have entered an era whereby this deficiency can be solved. We are in the early stages of what I'm referring to, but very much so in our lifetime. Maybe over the next 10, 20, 30 years, I don't know. Predictions is not my thing, but I'm feeling it and I'm seeing the signals and the indicators. I've been seeing and I've been observing over the past 10 to 15 years how two worlds are colliding. I shouldn't say colliding, I should say meshing. The more they mesh and become unified, in other words, the more unity there is, the more opposites work together for one single purpose to find the truth, I think we're going to start seeing some major breakthroughs. Science and religion began at odds with each other, and I believe we're getting closer and closer to there being an understanding that they are not. A similar phenomenon can be witnessed in the Jewish world. I discussed this on a podcast with Viggy50. We were talking about the Hasidic movement and different Hasidic sects, Chabad. And then you have the Litvish, and how when we were growing up, it was all splintered and segregated. Like it was like, stay away from them. And that's how everyone felt. Like the Litvish are too cool, Chabad, they're too whatever. And like everyone was very insulated and isolated. As Orthodoxy pushes forward with strength and growth, that separation has closed. And all ultra-Orthodoxy is slowly coming together. Similar phenomenon. The singers that we weren't allowed to listen to are the singers that parents wish their kids would listen to these days. Mordechai ben David and Avram Fried were so cool, you know what I mean? They didn't condone it in the Hasidic schools. Just 10, 15 years later, you wish your kids are listening to that. So this world, life in and of itself, fixes things, it repairs itself. Ultimately, what's happening, we're getting closer and closer to the truth. Through unity, we reach truth. All of that to say, and for me to repeat, that I believe we have entered an era whereby we could not only understand those signals, those intuitions, and derive the secrets that our geniuses of the past have given us, but to also articulate it and to make it understandable and digestible. I'm going to have a go at it myself right now. Will I succeed? I haven't the slightest idea, but I'm excited about even opening up the book, starting to write the chapter. I understand, just like with everything, I believe and have thought it could change, right? We always look back to the ideas that we had, the thoughts we had, the convictions that we had of a decade ago, and we say, it has slightly changed. I've evolved through experience more than anything. I understand that it's a little bit more nuanced. It's not so simple, right? Young kids, 12-year-olds, 15-year-olds, 18-year-olds, 25-year-olds, they believe all kinds of things that are not realistic. They're not grounded in reality. They might be idealistic, but they're certainly not grounded in the implementation of reality. In other words, it's not realistic. They cannot materialize, even though conceptually they might be good ideas, or idealistically they might be good ideas. And I don't imagine that changes. I imagine when I'm 40, I'll look back at the ideas I had today and I'll understand them even better. And I might change a lot of my views, just like I've changed many of my views over the past 10 years. And I understand that when I'm 50 and 60, I might look back at my views from 40, right? And in that sense, it's just like this continuous evolution. Nonetheless, we have to do our part, right? You have to start writing the first chapter to get to chapter 10. So I view myself in speaking about these ideas as perhaps writing chapter 1. It's okay to be wrong. It's okay to miss certain points. Ultimately, we will see that experience is more important than anything. This speaks to the phenomenon that deeper you dive, the more likely you are to experience depressive states, perhaps psychosis, and all kinds of mental health issues. In Judaism, there's a tradition that you shouldn't learn Kabbalistic ideas until you're the age of 40 or 42. Not everyone holds by it, but it is a very well-known tradition. And there's a reason for that, because delving into the depths of esoteric ideas and philosophy could drive a person insane. I believe I have experienced this phenomenon myself, so I could speak from experience. If you're not a worthy keli, a worthy vessel, a type of receptacle to be able, meaning intellectually, spiritually, and physically, if you're not in the right place to be able to digest and handle the information, the depth of these ideas, then it could consume you and it could manifest itself in all types of ailments, such as depression, anxiety, panic, so on and so forth. So always, always please proceed with caution. Mental health first, well-being first, emunah peshuta, simple faith in one loving God first, knowing that we know nothing first, humility first, personal prayer and connection to God first. Then, and only then, you want to dabble a little bit. You want to explore a little bit. You want to understand a little bit. Okay, get your feet wet, but don't let it consume you. To understand why it consumes us and why it manifests itself as unrest and anxiety, you have to understand that the body, think of the body as a car, like an automobile. And a car has a function, right? It has a purpose. And its purpose is to transport people. But for the car in and of itself, it's supposed to turn on, oil, gasoline, washer fluid. It has fluids. It has functions. It's supposed to do a job. It has a purpose. It has a reason that it exists. Imagine for a moment that the car had brains and that it became fixated on one question: how the wheels spin. Now, the car is not just a car. The car is a Bugatti. It's decked out with the absolute finest materials. It's a multi-million-dollar car. But it's fixated on trying to understand how the wheels spin. It didn't build the car for the purpose of the car figuring out how the wheels spin. But the car is obsessed. It consumes him. Now imagine the car sits and thinks all day, how do my wheels spin? I don't understand it. Now when the car has a job to do, like to rip down the Autobahn at 250 miles an hour, imagine it's fixated and thinking about the wheel spinning and why the wheel spins. Would it be able to do its job properly? The answer is no. That is an analogy for why pondering the depths, areas that do not need to be pondered specifically, why it leads to unrest in the human body and in the human mind. The Bugatti is like our body, an amazing, miraculous body that is capable of wondrous things. Hashem gave us a brain. It could think. And it does have a purpose. The soul and the brain and the whole combination absolutely has a purpose. The purpose is to ponder, to get close, and to get to know Hashem. One could even argue, counter-argument, no, but we're supposed to get to know Hashem, and part of getting to know Hashem is exploring, perhaps, do we have free will or don't we have free will? But that's not so. How do we know? Because of what it leads to. The performance report tells us what we're built for. When we are doing the right thing, our performance is ideal. When we are doing all the right things, it's at peak performance. When we're doing the wrong things, it's suboptimal. That is how we know that exploring the depths of philosophy, deep esoteric ideas, and trying to figure out paradoxes and complexities is not the purpose of living in this world. For some, it may be an added bonus, but only if it is. Only if it has a net positive value. If it leads to unrest, anxiety, depression, confusion, less devotion, cut it out of your life. And then, when you heal or you become a worthy vessel to handle it, perhaps revisit it, but don't obsess over it. It's not the purpose why we're here, and you will see that when you align yourself with the purpose, those issues fade away. All right, so if you're still with me, let's do this. You have three options to choose from. Philosophically, there's more, but these are the three core logical options that you could choose from. Determinism is anti-free will, or compatibilism. Either you believe that you have free will, or you believe that you don't and everything is deterministic, or you believe in compatibilism, which posits the idea that both are true and they're not mutually exclusive, meaning they could both be true at the same time. I've always felt that compatibilism was the closest philosophy to the truth, minus a few nuances relating to determinism, but we don't have to get into that. My intuition told me that both are true. It's like I kind of felt it, understood it through learning philosophy, but also contemplation and life experience, but I couldn't quite put a finger on it. What I began to do over the years is write down small notes when I had a bit of a thought to try to see over the course of months and years if I could get it into something that is more black and white. Like, why do I really feel the way that I feel? Who am I to say that both are true? What am I basing it off of? The answer is as follows, and we're going to again use an analogy with visualizations, because I believe it's the only way to paint a picture of an idea. Because I have thoughts in my head. I could, over time, as I just explained, write them down, but I can't paint them into your head unless you see a picture. I could describe it, but there's no guarantee that it will materialize and flow to the proper channels and that you will paint the correct picture. I believe compatibilism is true. We both have and do not have free will. It depends on what level. It's that simple. On the level of the soul, we do not have free will. On the level of the body, we do have free will. So again, the soul / consciousness, and it's a whole nother conversation. If the consciousness that we experience is the soul, I don't want to go there. Let's just, for the sake of this conversation, agree that the soul and consciousness are one idea. The soul, in and of itself, does not have inherent free will. I think of it like the glow of a light bulb. According to Judaism, the soul is a spark of Hashem, and it's eternal. If that's correct, then the soul, being like the glow of a light bulb, is an experience that you do not have control of, meaning you can't turn that experience off, so you absolutely have zero free will in that regard. But when that soul is placed into a body and it is paired with a body and a brain, you now earn free will to conduct your physical self. So again, there's two completely separate things here. If you separate them adequately and understand them as distinct parts, the entire free will dilemma seems to fade away. Your soul, this experience, this consciousness, this glow, you have no control over it. Not in the sense of it being on or off. You could kill yourself, heaven forbid, in the attempt to shut it off, but it can't actually die. According to Judaism, it's part of Hashem. It's an eternal experience. Like the glow of a light bulb, the glow itself, the glow of the light bulb doesn't control whether it glows. It would require a human, per se, to shut off the light bulb for it to stop glowing. But the glow itself doesn't decide, right? Like a program. You stick in the Mario Brothers and the program's running, the game itself cannot decide to stop the experience. Which begs the question, can Hashem stop our soul experience? If it is true that our soul is a spark of Hashem, then, and we believe that it's eternal, then I don't think so. I think it's an experience that is on. But let's say you don't want to go to that extreme. And let's say I'm getting one nuance wrong in that particular area. So you could say only Hashem could shut off that experience. But certainly you cannot shut off that experience. So you do not have free will on your soul consciousness experience level. Put that to the side. That soul is now in a body. In this body, paired with a brain, heart, physicality, now I have free will. And it's even more fascinating than that, because due to the fact that it was paired up in this manner, I could actually navigate the conscious soul experience. That is such beauty, such divine magnificence. It hurts my brain to think about this stuff. It goes in, like I said earlier, my brain goes into overdrive thinking about the stuff. We were not trained, we were not conditioned to think in such manners. It's so different than just being the car and doing your job, like doing what you were built for. But we can tap into it, but man, it's not simple. But if you do go there and you understand the significance of what I'm saying, you begin to realize the extent of the gift that physical life is in this world. This is just one part of it. There's so many other areas of deep spiritual exploration that you could get into to understand how utterly majestic life is or can be if you learn how to steer it. But we are now going from an experience that you don't control, an eternal experience, putting it into a body that now allows you to control it. So instead of feeling a certain way, let me give you an example. Sometimes the examples, they hit home harder for people, or they help people visualize it better. When you dream, you have no free will, right? You can't control your dreams. Sometimes you have a good dream, sometimes you have a bad dream. By the way, I think dreaming gives us great insight to many, many spiritual ideas I've discussed in the past and I'll continue to discuss in the future. Very, very insightful. But when you sleep, you have no inherent free will or control, right? And sometimes when we have bad dreams, scary dreams, I know for myself, I have terrible dreams sometimes. And then when I wake up, I laugh to myself that however bad it was, meaning I'll have a really terrible experience, let's say fear, I'll experience something that's so fearful. Let's say I was going up against a bad guy, a monster, or something happened, right? I'm about to die. I'm on an airplane. The airplane's crashing. All right. I have every nightmare under the sun. Thank you, Tati. Comes from my father. My father used to yell and scream in his sleep. I did too, actually, as a child. But anyway, so let's say I'm having a really bad dream. Airplane's crashing. The fear that I experienced during that dream, the terror, night terrors, is so high, it's disproportionate to even reality. How do I know? I've been in airplanes, not that were crashing, thank God, that were, for example, having terrible turbulence. Back when I used to have anxiety from flying, and the plane was dropping up and down hundreds of feet. Everyone on the airplane was shrieking. Bags were flying out of the thing, right? And I just sat, held on. That's how I dealt with it. I just, clinched my, like, that's it. We're going down. It is what it is. The level of fear that I experienced in that moment isn't even 25% of the intense fear that I experience when I'm having a night terror. And the same could be said of any such comparison. I'm saying that to say that you have no free will when you're dreaming. If you feel joy, it's it's boundless joy. If you feel terror, it's extreme terror, unrealistic terror. If the same situation was taking place, because sometimes you have terror about stupid things in a dream, and you wake up laughing because if that same situation would take place in real life, you would never react that way. That's a perfect example of the gift of your soul being housed in a body where you are actually given free will to direct the ship. On a soul level, you don't control the experience. There's something in Judaism, I forget the exact details, something about angels being jealous of man because man could put on tefillin and have that mitzvah. Why can't an angel put on tefillin? You don't have free will in an eternal experience. It's an experience. It's a program that's turned on. But in the physical experience, when that soul is placed in the body and you learn, you get past your fears and your anxieties and your panic and your terror and everything that holds you back in life. And by doing all of that, you meditate, you get close to Hashem, all the good stuff. And you get closer and closer to fully being able to direct that ship. And indeed, it does seem true that the more spiritually aware we are, the more we learn how to control our emotions, turn to God, and we have spiritual awareness, the more we are able to enact our free will. So the free will that we have in our physical body does seem to be relative to a degree, divine and miraculous, how that may be. The more spiritual we are, the more spiritual awareness we have, the more we work on our character, the more we learn how to control our emotions, subdue our ego, and learn self-control, the more free will we have, the less we have control over all of those parts of our life, the less free will we have. So in that vein, it is true that when you're standing on a line at the DMV and you have a person there with anger issues, never worked on himself, has all kinds of problems, interpersonal relationships, right? His entire life goes that way. Everything goes unchecked. He never corrected his behavior. He factually has less free will than the person next to him who did work on their midos, their behavior, their spiritual awareness, so on and so forth. Hence, and this is a microcosm of why getting close to Hashem, learning spiritual concepts, implementing all of these things to improve our behavior, why they're so important, and why they're so effective in this world. It breeds better humans, more evolved humans. So we're talking about three categories here. On the soul level, no free will. It's an experience. It's the glow of a light bulb. You cannot control it to shut that off. Then you have that soul in a body, physical body, that does have free will. And then you have, the more you work on your spiritual awareness, the more you work on your behavior and you refine your character, the more you are able to use that free will. Also, the more knowledge you have of spiritual concepts such as these, the more you're able to use that free will. And going back to my warning earlier about these deep concepts being able to lead to depressive, it's because when you're in a depressive state, you automatically align more with the soul level. This is a hard concept to explain. I've never formalized it before, but it goes something like this. People who have existential crises, who are deeply stooped in philosophical paradoxes, who literally wrestle with God, with existence, with truth, ultimately it leads to depression and anxiety, unrest. And when you're in that state, you become very, very aware of your consciousness, your experience, and you become aware of how you have no control over that experience. It then envelops you, and you feel like you have no control over your life, which ultimately is like a cycle that compounds the depression, which ultimately leads to serious, serious mental health issues where people want to commit suicide, heaven forbid, so on and so forth. And one of the ways to heal from that is to let go of those thoughts, those endeavors, those worries, and be the car. Go do physical stuff, live the physical life, actually be more materialistic to a certain degree. Doesn't mean you don't have to be spiritual. It means you stop worrying about the things that you don't control. And through patching that up, through getting reacquainted with your physical purpose and the fun of physical life, you begin to heal. And then the entire atmosphere around the entire thing heals, and the entire life experience begins to change. And that's also why when we look back at the struggles that we had, you can't really understand why you were in a place that you felt like there was no hope or you have no control. You were actually in a state of awareness. It wasn't not true, meaning that there was an element of truth to it. You could be in a conscious state where you actually are just focusing on the notion that you, Taka, don't have control. Because if you focus on your soul and this experience all day, and you're like, why am I having this experience? Why am I the glow of a light bulb? I don't want to. Why can't I be something else? Why do I have to be anything? You start thinking about all these things, genuinely are digging the grave of not having free will, of being locked in a spiritual prison. However, when you take yourself out of that, when you find that healthy balance, and you start focusing on what your purpose in life is, being there for your family, being a good person, working on yourself, getting close to God, learning, praying, just doing things that are healthy. Obviously, no on drugs and substances. Being a clean, healthy, strong person, you work out, you do all that stuff. It heals itself. And then that same experience that you were struggling with, the same experience that you felt trapped in, becomes the very experience that frees you. And you learn to let go and accept the parts that you don't control and embrace the amount of control that you actually do have in the physical sense. That is my belief of free will. To put it in a nutshell, I will reiterate, and I will do so by reading the notes that I wrote down a few weeks ago when I was first beginning to have enough clarity to put this into writing, which ultimately inspired me to create this video now. The soul/consciousness is like the glow of a light bulb. It has no inherent free will. It's an experience. It's like a program that is, I wrote over here, turned on by Hashem. And even just in this 1 month of thinking about it even deeper, I realized the issue there. Because if we are a part of Hashem, Hashem doesn't turn on the soul. The soul is on, just like Hashem is on. But again, that's why I said earlier, whether I'm wrong about this one detail because I didn't really dig into it deep enough or not, the entire premise still remains the same. But I wrote, it's like a program that is turned on by Hashem. However, when that soul enters a body and is paired with a physical brain, that duality, that body, through the brain, has free will. Through the brain, one can direct one's body, mind, feelings, etc. True free will. One can even direct one's conscious experience, hence compatibilism. At any given time, both free will and no free will exist. One can truly choose which way to go in life, but one cannot choose to shut off his soul. One can truly choose good over evil, but one cannot stop experiencing. We have no control over the program of life, but potentially full control over our behavior, thoughts, and feelings. And who cares? And by the way, by controlling your behavior, thoughts, and feelings, you change your experience, meaning you change the experience that your soul is having, as I just discussed earlier. And who cares about the program level anyway? The program level anyway. Most people are concerned with the physical, and in that realm, free will is as real as existence. The above explains why we lose free will after our soul leaves our body, because then we are permanently in experience mode. with no body, mind, and soul to direct. In terms of determinism and the potential for more or less free will, it appears that the more spiritually aware a person is, the closer they are in relationship with their creator, the more free will they are able to materialize. This is due to conditioning. Our natural animal state is to resort to instinct. Our animal instinct is deterministic, but with enhanced spiritual awareness, by becoming a worthy vessel, we become able to make decisions that supersede instinct. That's all I have for now. I'm sure over the years I will continue to explore this, and if anything insightful pops up, I'll create another episode on it. I'm happy to share what my experience with free will and thoughts surrounding free will is. And I hope that you find within this the power and the clarity to understand that you can control your life. I naturally experience a ton of anxiety, existential crisis, sheer panic. I've discussed it in previous episodes. Just less than 2 years ago, I'm laying on the floor with horrible panic attacks. And not for, when I panic, I am literally panicking and losing my self-control. And it's always related to not being able to let go, not being able to control the experience. So I know firsthand, this is not conceptual. I know firsthand what it's like to feel trapped in the experience. But I also know firsthand and through experience that there's a journey and that there's a path to heal from that and to feel in control again. And to feel, even if you don't feel in control, to feel so much closeness to Hashem and surrender that you're completely okay and content with the experience, with being a part of Hashem. And then it grows from there into gratitude. So your entire experience, if heaven forbid you have that type of negative experience whatsoever, can be flipped around. So I hope through learning this, the takeaway isn't negative. It has net positive value. You can use this information more than anything, besides for the cool factor and the wow factor of the philosophical depth itself. You could take the information to help guide you and to help bring you to a more elevated place in life, to a healthier, more healed place in life. Thank you for tuning in. Peace and love.
Leave a like and subscribe.